Okay, good afternoon, Harlem. This is Harlem Network News, and I am Terri Wisdom. And today we are just more than excited. We're in the process of beginning to celebrate Juneteenth, and the celebrations have already begun. Mayor Eric Adams had a big Juneteenth event last night at Gracie Mansion, and it was who's who in New York. So amazing. And it's just amazing that the momentum has just picked up and that Juneteenth is a national holiday. And as you know, Harlem Network News is a new media platform. We started at the onset of COVID, and we're still here. And we really started out of necessity because, I mean, my background is in film and television, and this is something that I was looking to do, to start a network right here in Harlem. But COVID made us jump in the deep water. It was necessary because Black people were walking around Harlem saying, I'm Black, I can't get it. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that they did not see themselves on television. And then when we got hit with the body bags, it was another story. So Harlem Network News has persevered, and we're clear that the information that we're imparting is so critical. Knowledge is power. I cannot go forward without just really offering our condolences to the families in Buffalo, as well as Uvalde, Texas, Tulsa. I mean, it's, and all those others that have lost their lives and loved ones to gunshot. This is personal for me. November of 2021, November 5th, I lost my son, 43 years old, to gunshot out on the Shinnecock Reservation. And the crime has yet to be solved. I am a new member of Harlem Mothers Save with Jackie Rowe Adams. And unfortunately, there are many members of that club. So we have to really stand firm. I do not support even having to be 21 for the AK-47. And that is a position of Harlem Network News. I think they need to be taken off the shelves completely. So needed to say all those things go forward as we approach Juneteenth. Juneteenth represents freedom, but it represents a lot for all of us as we continue. I have here with us a very special and honored guest, and that is in the person of John Reddick. And he works with the Central Park Conservancy, and they are doing a Juneteenth program on Sunday. I believe it's from 10 to 12. And John is gonna, you're gonna introduce yourself, John, and let us know. At Harlem Network News, we're always about knowledge is power. So we wanna make sure everybody understands everything. So could you just tell us a little bit about who you are, whose you are, and just what is a conservancy and your relationship to the Central Park Conservancy? Thank you, John.
Thank you, Terri. I'm really happy to be on Harlem Network News, and we're coming live from my cubicle at the Central Park Conservancy. And this conservancy is a partner in managing Central Park with the city's Parks Department, and we raise the additional resources and staffing that it takes to keep Central Park up to the premier level, what people expect when they come to New York. I mean, we're sort of the Disneyland of New York City, the major green space, a very densely developed area. So people come here and there's a kind of magic to the park and the sense of another century in terms of some of the design that you're moving through a space that's very, very unique. It's almost like a work of art. The work of art is accomplished through the landscape. And so I've been engaged with the Conservancy on a variety of projects, but first I got involved with them when we applied for a federal grant for Central Park North, the gateway to Harlem. And so part of that initiative, we did a streetscape improvement on the residential side and the park side, and implemented the Frederick Douglass Circle Monument. So it's part of not only going after the funding, but the crafting and advancing the design and moving forward with the artist selection. And
Wow.
I say all that because we're about to step out and look at what we can do to commemorate Seneca Village. And so this Juneteenth event is really our first, this is our second Juneteenth event. Last year we did it and it was so popular. We just did a small scale, some tours, but the public interest was so great that this year we thought we were really going to step up our game and look at some of the things we've learned as people who work here in the park, our historian, our programming people, and look at that history and try to figure out how we would program around it. And you were asking, I'm looking at some of my questions here, and one of the things is like, well, what is Seneca Village? And we're talking, everyone kind of knows what Central.
Yes, very important. It's become a buzzword. I'm Terri Wisdom, and this is Harlem Network News. So let's explain what is Seneca Village, because it's been all over the place.
What's very interesting, in 1825, right as New York was emancipating the African-American population of New York, a church from in Lower Manhattan, Mother Amy Zion, and some of its members came up to look at land that was for sale in the area of what is now 8th Avenue, Central Park West in the 80s, 85th Street, 82nd to like 85th Street. And in that period, a lot of the facilities downtown had churches, had cemeteries in and around their churches, crypts and cemeteries. Because of cholera outbreaks and other issues, they started to think that proximity of New York life to the burial of the dead was a possible spreader of disease and all of that. And you have to think, now we don't think about it, but back then there was still, if you ever go to the tenement museum, you'll see that building had an outhouse to the back, so you think of New York in the 1820s, and people are drawing water from wells that might actually be getting runoff from where they're having outdoor bathroom facilities. There's horses in the street. There's like the quality of life in terms of cleanliness and stuff is really a big issue. So you think of the dense lower city, you think of 5 Points where African Americans were, and we were having institutions, churches, and schools in that area. But when they started to look for other cemetery sites and the church came out here, Andrew Williams was one of the members, also thought this was a nice place to think about living. So he purchased the first piece of land in 1825. And we've actually tracked down some of his ancestors. Cal Jones, who used to be the Manhattan historian, was based in Harlem, did a lot of research in tracking down families and looking at the genealogy and the connection to the park. But anyway, so if you look at it, the city really didn't come up much north of 23rd Street. So 85th and what is 8th Avenue was pretty distant. And the streets weren't, we had this idea that we were going to put in streets, and there were maps showing where the streets were going to be. But for the most part, the streets north of 23rd Street had not been built yet. So there was the old Broadway, there was a meandering road to the north. And so even though they were laying this out, this property was for sale, the African Americans that bought land really early on were just looking at stakes that marked the streets and plotting out where they were going to live, almost like lottery tickets. Back then, because the streets aren't really there, you're kind of knowing that you're going in this plot of land. Well, the people, look at how real estate has skyrocketed in value, even in our lifetime in New York.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, it happened in Seneca Village. So someone like Andrew Williams, who was a boot black, you think about back then, everyone wore boots or shoes. Just like I was talking about, the streets were dirty, were muddy, horse manure, all of that. So your shoes got dirty pretty quickly. And wealthy people were paying people to keep their shoes maintained. And he was one of those people. And he had I think it was like $60 in 1825. And he bought a lot in the area of Seneca Village, as well as Mother Amy Zion bought some property there. And pretty quickly, other people came, cholera outbreak, and they could see up in Seneca Village, we had a natural spring pretty close to the Hudson River. There were a lot of things that gave them distance from the hostilities of the concentrated neighborhood downtown. That with the cholera outbreak, I really started to see by the 1830s that people were in a greater number were starting to come to live in Seneca Village. So at its peak in the 1850s, It had about 225 to 250 residents and
Wow.
about 50 structures. But the more interesting thing is, with the evolving value of land, that African American, just men could vote in New York at that time. And for African American men, unlike the whites, they had to have relatively $250 in value of property. Well,
In
Andrew
order
Williams,
to vote?
they had
Okay.
to own property of that much value. So
Wow.
Andrew Williams' $60 investment pretty quickly took him over the $250 value. And so in New York's, where only 100 African Americans had the ability to vote, 10 of them were in Seneca Village.
Okay.
So that's
So
pretty.
just not to stop you,
Mhm.
for those who are just joining, we are here just anticipating Juneteenth. There's so much excitement, so much activities, and we are really blessed to have here with us just one of our experts in history, John Reddick, who is with the Central Park Conservancy. Had something to do with the statue at the top of the park, the Frederick Douglass statue. So there's a lot going on, but we're speaking about a Juneteenth activity that's going to take place on Sunday in Central Park at 10 o'clock at Seneca Village. So Mr. Reddick is really schooling us on what is Seneca Village. I would like to know, because Seneca Village was in what is now Central Park, and it's Blacks who moved from lower Manhattan to escape the crowding and bad living conditions and cholera that took place. And it's just amazing when you're thinking this is 1825, before the Emancipation Proclamation. And in 1850, this was thriving. And the proclamation didn't come about till like the mid 1860s. So, I mean, this is really an amazing story. But where did the name Seneca Village come from? How did
We
we
don't
get
really
that?
know. We don't really know. We've
Okay.
done a lot of research because of the Seneca movement in terms of rights. People think that there's a lot of connections, but in all the research so far, not to say we're going to not eventually come up with it, but the Seneca Indians, because one
Yeah.
thing, we're in Central Park. It's probably the most elevated piece of real estate in New York. So a lot of people want to lay claim, to that history. And so I think because of the prominence of Central Park, that name, different people have claimed different histories to it, but we've not
In terms
established.
of where we got, I mean, because for me, when I hear Seneca, I think of, Native American Seneca,
Mhm.
but I just wanted to understand what the root was. And it was actually called Seneca Village there.
Well,
It's
in none of the writings in the post-existence, that name has come up, but we've never seen anything where it says like property for sale in Seneca Village or
okay.
So there's nothing that shows that in what time period that would have had that name. It's post-life it has evolved to have that name, but we have not found documentation.
Okay. So fast forwarding a little bit,
Mhm.
did Seneca Village, you said there were 200 families there approximately,
Mhm.
and a lot of the families were, from my understanding, African-American
That's
families.
correct. Mhm.
And there were even some women who were property owners.
Well, it's very interesting
So,
because part of it, like two things helped us know at least the names of people who were associated with Seneca Village, the census records of the period, and
okay.
then when the park was being built, there was condemnation, and they were taking all these properties. There was about 1,000 people over all the acreage that's now Central Park. There were about 1,000 different people scattered all over the broader site, but we were the largest concentrated community within what became Central Park.
Okay.
And so when these records showed that, the city offered people a certain amount of money for their property and they could appeal and ask for more, and Andrew Williams and some of the other, African-American property owners appealed for more value for their land. But by 1855, they were all had to, take what was being offered and move other places. So Mother Amy Zion is one of the churches moved north and went into Harlem. Some people moved
Okay.
to other places. We haven't been able to really track everybody, but they were dispersed. So the value of what was a concentrated neighborhood gets dispersed over a much greater area. So the power, we had a school, we had 3 churches. And so all these things become smaller communities, other places, and the concentration that Seneca Village was building on is dissipated.
Okay. So this is really a very powerful story. Um, how did the decision come about to build Central Park and then remove the people from Seneca Village? Where did that come from? When did it come? And who were the driving force to say, we're going to have a Central Park? And, you know, how long did that transition
Well, it's very interesting.
take?
There's a
Thank
book
you.
that's out that I can't think of the title now, but they have really great images because they talk about when we're coming into this just prior to the Civil War. Central Park's getting built in the 1850s into the period of the Civil War. And Lincoln, they were building the Capitol Dome, and he says to show that the Union's staying together, the federal government was continue to build that dome as a reflection as the country was going to stay one. They'd gone out to the west, and people had seen Yosemite Park and realized it was this unique, beautiful place. And in the midst of the Civil War, they rallied support to make one of the first national parks in that part of the country, acknowledging it was a superior piece of landscape. And in New York, the city fathers decided that for all the overcrowding and looking at the future, Central Park was just going to be streets and development. And they could see the city, even though it was down, around 23rd Street, was as far north as it really come in a major way. They realized with the density of the population, that there were a lot of poor people in the city that couldn't go to the country and other places. Even the wood, think about all the people that burn wood. If you were poor, you were probably going north, cutting down trees on empty lots and everything. So the city was looking very barren of green space. And they were very conscious that they should do a public space that everyone could come to that was green and substantial. So people could come but still feel like they were in the country. People who couldn't get to the Adirondacks and other places could come to the park and have a green experience, all income level. And that was radical thinking at the time. People come back now because they see all the sort of expensive apartment buildings around Central Park and all that. It was all about wealth. In the end, it was really driven by making the green space accessible to everybody. Even one of the first things they did, even before they got a lot of the park done, they made the lake so they could lower the water and freeze the ice so people could come and skate on the ice. And at that time, it was the only activity that women could do unescorted.
Okay.
And it was always about people enjoying the park, but also having other people enjoy watching other people engaged in the park. So most of the park-based recreational activities had to be something that other people who didn't do it could enjoy watching it. And ice skating was one of the first things.
It's very interesting. This is Harlem Network News, and I'm Terri Wisdom. And we're talking with Mr. John Reddick of the Central Park Conservancy, and he's giving us a real history lesson about New York City. And we're focusing, as we're moving towards Juneteenth, on Seneca Village, which was a community in Central Park that was inhabited for the most part from 1825 to about the mid 1850s by a majority of Black African Americans. And what was the quality of life like in Seneca Village for these African Americans?
Well, it's very interesting. And again, from the census, we could start to see the jobs and other things that people did. So they were working class. I wouldn't say they were mansion builders, but they were sort of a representation of a upwardly mobile group of African Americans. They had skill sets and things that sort of gave them a constant stream of earnings that allowed them to buy land. And so it was a significant community in that way. And again, they were distant from downtown. So the hostilities were like a targeted community that when the city got upset about the African presence, they would, they set fire to St. Philip's Church and all these things when they were downtown, where in Seneca Village, they were sort of distant from being observed. So they could have their church and their school and not be like this kind of target community of Black people that the 5 Points experience was very different. And then having the water source, and during Colorado knew that they had fresh water at a very high elevation, so the chance of it being contaminated and all that. So you can still see that water source. Summit Rock is still the highest point in Central Park. I can look west and see the Hudson River. And so landscape is something in history that doesn't survive in New York. And so really through this exercise for Juneteenth, we want really to have people think about what we're looking at in terms of the landscape, because that area is very much the way it was when our ancestors looked at it and thought it was a beautiful place for them to settle. The rocks that we're looking at are the rocks that the kids played on, or the foundation for the church. The water source was their water source. And so we really want people to start to imagine the story that the landscape can tell, and how can we build on that to do commemoration, because it's a very large site.
Wow, this is quite a powerful story. So we're going to fast forward again. This is Harlem Network News. And how did, because the Seneca Village site obviously was there. It's something that historians have known about, but we now have, I don't know if I can call it an exhibit, but a space in Central Park that is the Seneca Village exhibit. When did, where you can walk through, you can, put your phone to the QR code and get further information. And I understand there's some artifacts that may have been from the homes. Mm-hmm. So at what point and why and who did we decide to create this Seneca Village replica? How were you involved in this? And where are we going from here? What state is this Seneca Village site in currently?
Well, here's where I feel like an OG.
Okay.
Because as a Harlem resident and just curious about New York City history, there was a show almost 20 plus years ago at New York Historical Society. And there had been some research. There was a book out related to pre-park, Central Park, that sort of acknowledged that there had been this neighborhood there. And so the Historical Society did an exhibition. So Cynthia Copeland was working there at the time. And I remember they had all the different names of property owners. And there was like a little box. If you knew or had a relative or any information about any of these people, give us some information. So there was almost nothing known except for this map of and the names of who owned properties. And bit by bit, the last 20 years, a variety of people have pieced together history. The Conservancy, because we're responsible to manage the land, have facilitated. Archaeologists have gone to different specific sites and done digs and come across, beautiful tea set. Realized people had a very middle class, blue tea set. They found a toothbrush in terms of we think it's nothing now, but back then, thinking about your physical health and cleanliness was a kind of elevated consideration. And so they found a lot of different bits and pieces of information that gives us a clue about the lifestyle of the people that live there.
Okay, and at what point, as this research was being done and information was being found, was it being called Seneca Village at that point, or?
Well, yeah. In the writings, I'm having a brain misconnect.
So much information.
The name of the book that came out at the time, but it talked about this. This community was known as Seneca Village, and it had these maps and things that kind of showed the plots of where people had land, and a sense of names that you could go back to the census and look at. So they started to create a very preliminary story, and the Conservancy has worked with these different groups to help move the storyline along. We help facilitate them getting to do archaeological digs. We have a historian here, Marie Warsh, who sort of worked with all these different groups to pull together this information. So the exhibition and kind of signage that's in the park looks at all these different sites. If you walk through the site, I forget there must be 15 or 20 different sort of plaques that allows you to stand in a spot and say, here's where Andrew Williams lived, this is what he did. Nice. Here's where the church and the school were. These were sort of like the community center, and you get a sense of that. There were a large proportion of women owners of land, either through being widows or different things, and so they could rent. So there were Irish that were renters of these African-American homeowners and all of that. So there's a lot of little interesting stories. Summit Rock, which is the highest spot, seems like they didn't build there, but so you realize it probably was a gathering space, a sense of their sort of viewing. They could look over and see the Hudson River and all of that. We're looking at neighboring communities. We don't think about it now. We know about Hamilton's house being at a high point in Claremont and Morris Jamel, but all along the river, we just think about, say, where the Roosevelt's house is further up in Hyde Park. But in New York, north of 23rd Street was still like country along the river. And all these wealthy people had houses. The Althorpe apartment building was a house called the Althorpe, and all of that along the Hudson River. So we start to think now, maybe some of these Black families, they could have been a laundress for some of these wealthier people. One of the churches seems like it was a summer church where these groups that came up was sort of like, what is it, going out to Montauk or something, to be along, it was healthier, it was along the river, it was distant from the more dense population. So we were away, we were east of that. But I can't imagine that as a workforce, it wasn't some dialogue back and forth.
Yeah, back and
skill
forth.
set.
Yeah. So, I mean, so many interesting stories. We could continue and continue. And it's really an honor for the Harlem Network News audience, Harlem and Harlem of the world, to just really get this critical information, because there's also the concept of Sankofa. If you don't know from whence you came, it's hard to know your present and your future. So this is certainly very interesting. Now, with Seneca Village, the Seneca Village site or project, how long has it been there? Is it a permanent exhibit? What are the circumstances of it, and why was the decision made to do Juneteenth at the Seneca Village site? I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but I want to hear from you, John Reddick, who is one of the major forces in this, as to why and who came up with the idea.
Well, I mean, as history progressed, there was a lot of interest from the Parks Committee and Community Board 10 about sort of tracking and following how we were going to move forward. There was like one big main sign that kind of said this is where Seneca Village was and gave a little history, but it's over such a broad area that we thought using some of the other information that we've kind of gathered, we could really give people a bigger overview as they navigated different parts of the area and tell them history. So Karen Horry, who's still on the Parks Committee, she's really instrumental with that committee.
Yeah, she's the chair.
Yes. And she's been very much engaged all along and keeping us to our mission and focus. And so we went from that one major sign, I forget when that went up, made years and years ago, to working with the historian here and the additional information to do what it seems like an exhibition, but it's like signage throughout the different site locations and give you sort of a storyline around different aspects of the community. And it's up now, sort of quote unquote, as temporary signage. But as we think about commemoration and what we're going to do forward, we really want to appeal to the city authorities to allow us to keep that signage up until we advance the next level of engagement about thinking about public art and commemoration for the site.
That would be great, because I guess, as we speak about this, I mean, I don't know the boundaries of a Central Park and the Conservancy and what can be done, but it almost feels like if there was some little replica of the house or what one of the houses looked like, and, people could actually kind of, visualize or go in or,
We just did that at the Met, has a show up this right now. And first of all, Seneca Village existed before there were any photographs, so there's no image of what it looked like, or so all of it would be in our imagination to do something. And I always feel like, why let one person define my imagination when the landscape can be provocative in a lot of different ways about thinking about that history. And the team here went out to Weeksville, which does have some houses of a slightly later period. And we feel like as African Americans, we have so few resources to tell our story that can really make people feel the energy of like what that story either generated or what it was like. And I think thinking about our life in New York along this broader context, here's someplace where you can come and really connect to why did they want to be here. And from Summit Rock, I can see the drop off, even though you see the Plaza Hotel or whatever. If you imagine that isn't there, you realize how far downtown you could see and how safe they felt from the distance of downtown. I can see the Hudson River where they fished and maybe did trade or commuted getting downtown. There's always like in your bones story tied to the
that you
lands,
feel it and
tied to the landscape that allows you to take your own imagination and start to think about what that is without me telling you what it is. Or 10 years from now, some historian comes up and says, well, it didn't look like that. They didn't make wood houses that way. Whatever, it allows you to always be enlightened in relationship to the unique thing that isn't in New York, and that's the landscape,
So it's very, very interesting because I mean, I've been to the Hamilton House when it was on Convent, and then when they actually moved it, and we know it was originally on the water. So it's really an empowering thing to look at these houses. And I mean, I guess, in that arena, photography was not happening, but, there are photographs of the time. So,
well, yeah, but there is the daguerreotype, for example, of the Lyons family. And so, and because they're very prosperous, they're in their silks, they're in a daguerreotype, and they can trace that they were property owners. They owned land in Seneca Village, but they never lived there. And the property really was the women's father's, Mr. Marshall's property. So Mr. Lyons, I forget the other family, they're really moving ahead on the value of the land. It really was the Marshall's, resource. And they just followed the value of the land, sold the land, and had a business downtown where they had a place for Black seamen to live in the area of the Seaport Museum, where they were burned out during the draft riots and had to leave. For me, that's a much more interesting place to do a statue or something to the Lyons, because no one thinks about Black people at the Seaport Museum within the shadow of City Hall and all that. They are prosperous because they did work the real estate network to put their investment in this facility that made them the target of the broader, more hostile community. And so that's where in our effort, we want some truisms about what Seneca Village is and not sort of a glorified, imagined history. So you look at those people, and because they look so prosperous, they think everyone in Seneca Village lived like a Vanderbilt or something. And that's not the power of Seneca Village. Was working class people owning a piece of land in New York that allowed them to vote and have a voice in government and all of that they wouldn't have had as regular people. And so that's the balancing act of what we're trying to do.
Such a story, such history. And I'm glad that it's coming out. And if you could just also share within Central Park, is the Seneca Village the only like site or monuments or whatever it is to Black people or people of color?
Well, my favorite thing that nobody knows, the next time you're at Grand Army Plaza, you're standing in front of the Plaza Hotel and you look at the southern tip of Central Park and you see that gold statue of Sherman on a horse. The woman who's holding the branch and standing in front of him is an African-American woman.
Okay.
And the glory of that is the artist had used her for a lot of other work. She's represented a lot of other of his work. As an artist, he was a great figurative sculptor. He couldn't do horses. He brought in another artist to do the horse. He didn't think he was an architect. He had Richard Morris Hunt design the base, and actually knowing that it was going to be gilded and the clarity of the race wouldn't be seen in the gilding. He was a subversive artist by wanting, in the time where if he said she was African-American outright, he probably would have never let her be there. He was subversive enough to get her there. And so the first monument you see going into Central Park is an African-American woman.
That's powerful. And I know we have an African-American, I'm having a little brain freeze, but in the women's suffrage.
Right, but that came late. But again, one of the things,
this is just recent. Yes.
Right, but I'm just saying, even in that, it started out the African-American woman was not in the original
Oh,
proposed
suffrage. Okay.
the suffrage one,
Okay.
and they went through a variety of iterations to eventually realize they would not go forward. They didn't put an African American woman in that mix. And so partly why we really want, as the Conservancy, want to be engaged really early on in anything in Seneca Village, because we want it to really be reflective of all that history, and not just, some artist comes up with, something everybody thinks is great, but maybe has no real honest
Yeah.
interpretation to the
Right.
history.
Yeah. No, this is very important. And I'm Terri Wisdom. And for those of you who are just joining in, as we approach Juneteenth and, freedom, we are speaking with Mr. John Reddick of the Central Park Conservancy, and we're talking about Seneca Village. And there's going to be an incredible Juneteenth event on Sunday at 10 o'clock. And we were also just talking about Central Park and monuments and the history. And we know that we're in the process of doing a gate plaque for the Exonerated Five, which was formerly the Central Park Five. And the gate is for the Exonerated Five and all of those that have been wrongfully incarcerated. So we're moving, and on Mr. Reddick is on a committee for that. I'm on a committee for that also. This is also driven by Community Board 10. And there's a great and incredible story behind that, just in terms of what happened. It was a very public story, but this is the Conservancy really trying to speak the truth to power of different things that have happened in our community. And you can,
Well, I would like to speak. I think
Thank
people have one image of the Conservancy, and I don't say we're like angels on every front. But as a citizen of Harlem, everything they've ever done in the northern end that touches my community has been the same elevated quality of anything else in Central Park. And we've worked long and hard with Community Board 10. We've really been engaged in all the public initiatives, from the Harlem Mir to the Dana Center. Now we're about to do the Harlem Mir Center that's looking at the rink and the pool. Even this piece that you're talking about the Gate of the Exonerated, came out of a dialogue with Community Board 10. But we've been very, very responsive. And it always hurts me when I sort of feel people of color feel Central Park isn't for them. It's for everybody. It's like it was designed as a democratic space for everybody. And so even when it was tarnished by that awful sort of presentation sort of Trump and the Central Park 5 issue, it besmirched what the park really meant to the community in a bigger way. So I just encourage you, if you haven't been to Central Park, haven't been in it, it's elevated in its maintenance, and it's for you. It's not for the people that everyone keeps talking about. They're out in the Hamptons in the summer. They're not even using Central Park. It's really for us. And I really encourage you investigate the woodlands, all of the really magnificent areas in the northern end of the park.
Yeah, thank you for sharing and speaking about that, Mr. Reddick, because I think that that's very critical. I'm Terri Wisdom, and this is Harlem Network News. And there may be a need to have like some initiatives, to have like explore Central Park and really target people of color, because I think that and particularly African Americans, because I think with the incident of the Exonerated Five, that may have created some angst and, some fear, and just not feeling safe in the park, or feeling that their children could be safe. But on another level, because we have such inequities that really COVID has pulled the scab off all the wounds, a lot of people are so busy surviving, that they don't really think in that manner, that they can actually go to this park and do all these things. And some of the things in the park are free and they can enjoy. So there has to be I think, just as a media person, and, this is a part of what Harlem Network News is about. There has to be a retooling, a re-education, a sharing, so that there is a coming together of New Yorkers to be able to enjoy New York. Because we know, and it's not even only in the African-American communities, there are some places in New York City that people never go off their square block. You know, I mean, that's a reality all across the
But
city.
why
So
don't they?
don't,
There's like, I always encourage
yeah,
curiosity. People are coming from all over the world to come
right.
to New York.
And
If you have no money, you know, I don't encourage jumping the turnstile. But if you just have one token, you can go down to the Staten Island, to the end of Manhattan, and get on the Staten Island ferry for free and cruise past the Statue of Liberty. Just get off on Staten Island and come back and see the lights of the city come on at night, whatever. It's like, it's not always about money, but you have to have
right,
a level
yeah, I
of
think
curiosity and investigation, because I can't believe there's any museum where a mother with 3 children came to the desk and said she wants to come in and she has no money, that wouldn't let her in. I mean,
right, yeah.
so
I think it's and this is where there's re-education, retooling, exposure, you know, because it's money, but it's also a mindset,
it's
you
a
know, and it's
curiosity.
so,
It's a
yeah,
human.
and it's so interesting. I think of some of our heroes like Cicely Tyson, and in reading her book, it was so interesting where she spoke about, like, when her mother was at work, she would sneak out and get on the trains and go all over the place. You know, she had that innate curiosity to, you know, learn and know more. So I think that, you know, I know the schools are doing it, taking children on trips and things like that. But
that is one of the things, I
yeah,
mean, talking about the
yeah,
schools, you know, if educators in the communities that border Harlem, you see all the private school teachers realize the resource of the park,
yeah,
whatever. They start thinking about, well, what would they like? You know, I think we'd be more than willing to be accommodating if there was a kind of concerted program within the education system in Harlem, whatever the concept, can we use the park for these
right.
reasons? We're organized.
We've got to work on it. And I mean,
Right.
you know, I was fortunate, you know, these are alternative schools prior to the other kinds of schools that are happening now, charters and this and that. But my children attended Central Park East, which was right there on 106. And part of what they did every single Friday is they went ice skating and they got instructions. You know, so we've got to move in that direction. But I think what you're doing with the Conservancy and, you know, Seneca Village and all of those things. So let's get to what's going to happen on Juneteenth. What are some of the activities that are going to happen that really people can tune into? And, you know, so just tell us the activities. And then as we're nearing the end of the time, let us know how they can find out more about it. And do they need a ticket? Like, what has to
No
happen?
ticket, it's free. Don't even think about money. Every aspect of it is absolutely free. You can come into the park at 85th and Central Park West. You'll see signage, things if you're coming from that direction. It's just in the park off of 85th Street. There's a path that takes you right into the area of Seneca Village. There's going to be a main introductory tent. There'll be a musician playing there. You'll hear music, a place to get oriented. We've got a really beautiful program that's printed. It talks about the different themes and different sites throughout the park. The performances will be rotating. So we're going to be doing performances from 10 in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you'll be seeing different artists will be, you know, performing at different sites. So, and they all have themes, either reflection, commemoration, education, community, women ownership. We're having like a little group of women pretending they're having tea in Seneca Village and just kind of talking about their life and so reflecting. And so it's our first wave of like artist engagement, where the bits of history we do know about Seneca Village, we're allowing artists to sort of bring their own level of interpretation. And one of the star offerings of the day is going to be Marilyn Nelson, who, in using the history references that have been accessible through the signage in the park and what's been written about Seneca Village, she's done poetry looking at different aspects of the park. So she's going to be doing a reading with interpretive dancers, sort of conveying her storyline. And that's going to be up in the Summit Rock area. But we have performers of all, and we're going to have a tap dancer. Andrew Williams, like I said, have been a boot black person who's trying the shoes, and the tap dancers will be interpreting sort of through shoes and sort of using shoes as a way in his dance, and all to kind of talk about Andrew Williams as a person. Just a plethora of really amazing quality performers. We really want families to come. We found in one of the archaeological sites beads. And so there's going to be a whole thing where kids can take beads and make a bracelet and sort of connect to some of the archaeological history of the area and all that. We're soliciting your comments. At the end of the day, there's going to be a gathering place where people can sort of talk about what they remember or liked about the day and what they would like to see commemorated. And that's going to start to be the base of sort of our looking going forward. We're going to document it very much. We're trying to keep it very family oriented. We've really targeted Harlem and the Upper West Side area as the community to come out for this. So I really encourage you to come, and I think it's going to be a wonderful day. We're looking like we're having great weather. So.
I'm actually muted. Sorry about
that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to this. And can you just give the times again, Mr. Reddick?
Okay,
this is Harlem Network News, and we're talking about the Juneteenth program at Seneca Village in Central Park, where you can enter on West 85th Street. And I think there'll be signage or people to direct you to where to come. And it's gonna just be a great day. So can you just tell them, is there like a website or,
If you go to the Central Park Conservancy, Central Park, I don't know what the website number. If you just type in Central Park and Juneteenth, the event will come up. It gives you information about all the performers and sort of the location of the activities. But again, the main entrance is going to be from 85th and Central Park West, so it's not far from the Broadway line or the line that goes up 8th Avenue. Frederick Douglass Boulevard. And the performances start at 10. It will be running from 10 to 2 o'clock. And there's going to be rotating performances at all the various different sites. So there'll be several of them going on at the same time. And so you'll have, over that period of time, you have a chance to see a lot of the different artists. So it's going to be a really wonderful experience for families. It's Father's Day, so dads,
yes,
a place to come spend time with your kids in the park. We're going to have beautiful weather. It's beautifully shaded area. If you haven't been, I think it'll be a great experience.
Okay. I'm I'm empowered just listening to what you're saying, and I know that a lot of thought and energy went into really planning this, and it's just so powerful that now this year for Juneteenth, like you said, it's Father's Day, but it's also very empowering because it's the first year that it's actually the national holiday on Monday. So there's just a lot of activity, a lot of
friends. Yeah, you think it was Christmas. I mean, the calendar is very packed. And I'm sure other people are doing wonderful things.
Right.
This is the best.
Well, we're hoping, and I know you said you're not live streaming it. We're kind of one foot in COVID, one foot out. But we probably you're going to have some documenting, and we'll probably be able to get to a site and see it. Because now that's the whole thing. There's so many, I'm concentrating a little bit on Harlem, but we know that tomorrow at 11 o'clock in the morning, there's a parade and a festival. The Masjid Malcolm Shabazz on 116th, they have been celebrating Juneteenth for 29 years. So they are having the parade, which will go across 116th, up Frederick Douglass, down 125th, and then back down Malcolm X, where the festival will take place on 116th. I know that Congressman Espaillat and our state senator Cordell Clear and our district attorney, Alvin Bragg, and one of the ministers is going to be doing something on 118th. I believe the Exonerated Five have a book signing somewhere on 113th, about 12, and then they're going to be back at the Schomburg. So that's just, Upper Manhattan, and then Seneca Village on Sunday. And Forces of Nature, one of our major dance companies that just did Dance Africa, they do the Kwanzaa program, they're going to be at Carnegie Hall. And then even out in Southampton, they're doing their second program for Juneteenth. And there's an African American museum out there because there's a whole history also of Black in the Hamptons. And so the women and Black women in media are coming out, I believe, for that tour. They're honoring a few people. There's the Eastville Society out there that, you know, does the history of Blacks in the Hamptons. And then there's an event, I believe, in the beach in Sag Harbor. So there is a lot going on, and that only touches on it. And as I said, Mayor Adams kicked it off last night at Gracie Mansion. So Mr. Reddick, if you would just give us a few closing statements and encouragement and how you're feeling as you're embarking on this great event that you've been a major part of making happen.
Well, it's been really wonderful because none of these things happen without broader teamwork, and people here at the Conservancy really, we just had our staff-wide presentation. There was really a lot of excitement about among the workforce here at the park for this event. A lot of the workforce is volunteering to help participate and man the event. So it's meaningful, not just to the city, but also the people here that work and maintain the park. And I just encourage you, when you're next in the park, to thank some of the people that you pass that really do the maintenance and doing the work to keeping the park really safe and wonderful for all of us. I think they're often overlooked, and particularly a lot of them are people of color like myself, and just to let them know that the community really appreciates the hard work they put in to make sure it's just as nice and wonderful for you on 110th Street as it is on 59th Street.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And you have stroked my curiosity. I want to know more about the Conservancy, how many people it is, and all of those kinds of good things. But thank you so much for taking the time, because I know that this is crunch time, you know, getting ready. It's a Friday, late Friday evening. So thank you, Mr. Reddick. And happy Juneteenth, everyone. Happy Freedom Day. And it's empowering. I mean, this all started in Texas, and when they didn't know that they were freed until 2.5 years after emancipation. And at that time, they began to celebrate. And I know one of the pictures, I think that's on one of the flyers, shows somebody plowing a field with a book in their hand, you know, showing, hey, we're free, and now I can read.
I just want to remind people that Seneca Village in 1825 was way ahead of the curve. And so even as we celebrate the end of it, there were people right here in New York that were seizing the opportunity and kind of setting an example of what the possibilities were.
Okay, all right. So that's inspirational. And coming from Harlem Network News, the possibilities are infinite. Harlem Network News looks to be the CNN, HNN, Harlem Network News. And please reach out to us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, HarlemNetworkNews.com, soon to be in public access television. So we have access to more. We have a newsletter. Please support us. If you have stories, reach out to us at HarlemNetworkNews@gmail.com. You can reach us directly at 646-261-5397. And of course, donations are welcome, or any ideas for funding and helping us keep the word out. Knowledge is power, and we are the voice and drumbeat of Harlem. Thank you very much, and happy Juneteenth. And thank you, Mr. Reddick and the Central Park Conservancy.
Thank you,
Seneca Village forever. Thank you.
Good night.